supports her and 2 daughters, so that is wonderful.
Thank you. I'm going to start out with a story. This was a few years ago, and as Eddie mentioned, I have 2 daughters, and they're 17 and 15 now. So when my older daughter got into middle school, the youth group took a trip and went to Acquire the Fire, Battlefield Youth Weekend. And it was an awesome event, and I went with her, and we were praising and worshiping and learning a lot of important things about God, and our culture is really, really frightening right now. It's a really hard time to be a parent and just to see what's going on. So I thought this was really incredibly valuable. So when my younger daughter came along, the church wasn't taking this trip. And I thought, well, this is terrible, because this is really the most important thing that we can do, is to raise our children to know the Lord and to make right choices. So I said, well, we're going to go as a family. And I enrolled our family as a youth group. And still, every year I get a call asking me, am I going to bring my youth group to this event? And we traveled up to Richmond, and I was able to drag my husband along as well. And he is a fabulous Christian. In fact, he was born in the Philippines, the son of missionaries. He lived there until he was 7. But he's very busy. He's an orthopedic surgeon, and it's hard for him to even sit still for a movie. So to spend a whole weekend at an event is a challenge. But we drove up to Richmond, which is where he grew up and where I went to college, and I had worked for IBM for 12 years there, and both our kids were born in Richmond. And we stayed in a hotel at the convention center. And there was another little piece that helped me to get him there. And I don't know who might know him, but he's a car guy. And he had gotten this 67 Mustang from the original owner before we moved from Augusta, Georgia to Wilson. But the engine blew when it was being transported. And so we had to ship it up. It was actually, my dad was going to drive it up, and then as he was driving it over to my parents' house, the engine blew. So my dad was so glad it didn't happen when he was driving the car. So it was brought up here, and he had a labor of love for many, many years working on this car, which is now finished. And who knew at the time that I could ride it in parades to now? But it was moved up to Richmond for a certain part of the project. So that was a little bit of the pull, was that he could go away from the event for a little while and check on the status of his car while we were at the event. So this was God at work, right? So we go in there the first night, and we're worshiping and we're praising the Lord, and we're together as a family, and that is what matters the most. And the most amazing thing happened. The theme for this conference was restoration. And they lowered down from the ceiling a 67 Mustang, the exact car. And they told a story about how, the world wants to tell you that you're a piece of crap and you're all used up and you're junk. And the story of this father and son who went and bought this car, and they were so excited about this car, and they could see what it was going to become. And they were telling their friend, and their friend was looking at it like, you're nuts. This is a piece of junk. And the message was, God sees you as that beautifully restored car, what He has in mind for you. And I just thought, God is amazing. I know that, but He speaks to us, and He's so personal, and He gets us where we need to be. And so I'm just like, this is incredible. And we was using this time together, and then we stayed at the hotel. There was also a cheerleading competition happening that night at the hotel. And they were all over the place. And I saw kids, and they had really big bows. I didn't know you could hold a bow that big on your head. And they were really loud. And it was the worst night I ever had in a hotel. So I didn't get any sleep at all. And so the next morning, because it was a full night, and then all next day, we went back to the convention center, and we were worshiping and singing, which I love. And Lou went off to check on his car. And it was getting to be close to lunchtime, and I was tired, and I was hungry. And this guy got up, and he was talking to us, and he said, look around at this group. We are so diverse. We're from different nationalities. We're from different denominations. And on and on, all the differences. And there was a lot of diversity there, which was great. He's like, but we all love the same Jesus. And I thought, amen. Who doesn't love cheese? And who thought that this is something we can really connect about? There's all kinds, Swiss, American, I love cheese, I'm hungry. And you never really thought about that bringing you together. And I'm going through all these things in my mind about who would have thought Jesus? And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm a Jesus girl, I'm at a Jesus conference. He said Jesus. So I cracked myself up and I'm over there in tears about, oh, Jesus, I mean, obviously, and how far along I got on the cheeses, which I really do love. And my girls look at me like, what is wrong with you? Because I cannot even, talk. And it was just really a moment. And I share that with you for two reasons. One, I want you to understand where my heart is and who I am. Because I was a full-time mom and serving in the communities and in the public schools and teaching Bible studies and ministering to women and leading the FCA with my kids before I got this call to this new mission field, which I argued a lot about. And that is a whole story in and of itself, which I'm happy to give you all the details if you have time or interest or want to invite me to your church to give a testimony. But that's where I came from. And I also want to tell you because I have experienced that on the floor when we're debating, and I'm thinking, we're not communicating. We're out here going, we love Jesus, and people over there are going, yes, Jesus. And we're completely crossing. We're not able to come together and get something done because we're really not getting the message. And I was fortunate enough to go to an event last year where Rick Santorum was the keynote speaker. And this was for a pregnancy center and celebrating life. And he said, you can look on C-SPAN and watch the debate. You don't even have to have the sound on, just watch. And you can tell who's debating by the visuals. If they have graphs and charts, then they're probably a conservative. And they're appealing to reason. And they don't understand why, it's obvious the numbers show something. And if they have a picture, a photo, or a person, then they're probably a liberal, and they're tearing at your heartstrings. And what he said was so relevant. He said, we have abandoned reason in this society. And we are more concerned with what feels right than what is right. And if we don't start appealing to people's emotions, given that that's where we are never going to win that argument. Because people have already decided based on their emotions. When you have an emotional response to something, then you start to use logic to reason it out why you feel that way. You don't really want to move. And I think that's why some of us were so shocked that Obama got reelected, because it just doesn't make sense. It clearly doesn't make sense. And we're going to continue to argue on what makes sense. We are not going to win. So it's a real challenge. And for me, coming into this mission field, and I was telling Kathy, I feel like a spy, like I went out there and I can tell you now what it's like in Raleigh, and so now I want to transition just to some of our accomplishments of what we have done. This is my first term in the legislature that I just finished, and it's just been such an honor to represent the people of Wilson, and I also have Pitt County, because it's such a great community, and people really come together, and they really do care, and they're willing to do their part, because it's not anything I can do or say we're going to do that's really going to change. It takes all of us. So that has really been an honor, and to be welcomed as a contributing member, having not been from North Carolina, but I've been here 10 years now by choice and love it. So I will go over some of those accomplishments, and now I am running for re-election in November. I do have opposition. I am in one of the very few swing districts that we have in the way that the districts lay out now. So I really do need your support and your help. So during my first term, I'd say the biggest accomplishment was, of course, we were in a bad economy, and we needed jobs, and we were having a lot of trouble there. So that was the number one goal, jobs, jobs, jobs in the economy. And so in order to address that, there were two major items right off the bat. One was unemployment insurance reform. We had $2.5 billion of debt to the federal government for the unemployment insurance. And the way it was set up was that the government would automatically pay it out, and then we would automatically go further and further into debt. And we need to reform that system, because our employers pay that insurance premium, and it makes it go higher and higher and higher. So it was really a significant increase that we were going to see. We talked about reforming that, and right now we are the only state in the country, I'm pretty sure that's accurate, it's my understanding we're the only state in the country that has not accepted the 99-week extension. Because when they came out with another 99-week extension, part of the deal was that you could not change your plan at all. You could not reduce your benefits, you could reduce the amount of time that you were getting the benefits or the dollar amount. And we needed to do both of those things because we were not competitive in our region. We were paying a higher salary when you were unemployed, higher than necessary, and for a longer amount of time. So we needed to reduce that, but we also had the businesses to pay more because we had to go from both sides because this was a big problem that was going to be hanging over our head. So we wanted to address it on both ends. So it was like, yes, I mean, in some ways it was almost like a little tax, but there was no real way around it for those companies with insurance, but also reducing the benefits. And they said, well, if you do that, we're not going to extend it. And the extension part, the federal government funds fully. So again, free money, how could we not take that? But we did it because it was going to make us have debt for a much longer period of time, and it was going to be bad for our employers. But it was a difficult decision. There was a lot of pressure, like we are so mean and we just don't care about those people, you would think. But we do. But we made that difficult decision, and now I think that debt is going to be paid off in the middle of next year. So it's down from $2.5 billion to $1.6 billion, and it's working. And we're also seeing much better employment numbers. Our unemployment numbers are way down. So you are seeing that people, when they don't have those extended benefits, will take another job. They will go back to work. You know, you do need to have a safeguard in a transition time, but we're seeing that there's been some articles written about how North Carolina is getting it right, and we're a model for that. So that was one big thing. Another one is the tax reform, and the tax code hadn't been changed since the Depression era, 1930s, and everyone keeps talking about, well, we need to change the tax code, but it's really hard to do because there's a lot of people involved, and no matter what you do, if you shift it, you know, it hurts someone. So it's hard to make that happen. So it was hard for us to do it, but we we accomplished it. And we went down from a 3-tiered system to a flat tax rate, where this year it's down from the highest was 7.75, and now it's down to 5.8. And then if we meet certain revenue targets, it will go down to 5.75. So everyone who paid taxes got the benefit. And they will argue that the rich got a bigger benefit. Well, that's only because they are paying more money in taxes. Okay? I mean, we made sure that those people who were in the safety net who were not paying taxes, that exemption was increased, and that the amount of money for child credits was increased, so that those people who are at a very low income, they benefited and they did not get hurt, and everyone got their taxes lower. And then we also addressed the corporate taxes, and the corporate tax rate went down. I think it's at 4. I mean, it's on a scale, and so we were not competitive in the country and in our region, and we were ranked 44th worst tax climate overall by Tax Foundation, which looks at all of the taxes. And after these changes that we made, we moved to 17th best tax environment. And we have the fastest growing economy in the Southeast. So we have really improved on the jobs number, and we're moving in the right direction, and we're seeing that work. And so now we're seeing, and you'll hear this, that these drastic cuts to taxes have given us a revenue problem, and we're not going to be able to fund the basic services. Well, I'll tell you that that is not true, and we do have for the tax further reductions that there would be revenue targets that we would have to meet in order to see it reduced further. And there's room in government for efficiency. I mean, in the private sector over these last years, they have had to tighten their belts and do things better. They haven't had a choice. And government's had a choice of just accepting debt or increasing their taxes, and we're not going to allow that. So we are looking really, really at efficiency. Another area for jobs and economy was regulatory reform, and regulations are really important, and we want to have a safe environment, and we want to look out for our people, but they can get a little bit overboard, and if you have people around whose job it is to regulate, they're going to find something to do. So if you have too many of them, you just get more and more and more, and we found that it's really almost impossible to change a rule. I mean, it's like the fourth arm of government. Once they go through the rule process, it's so much work to remove a rule that you wind up just coming up with another rule, and then the rules conflict with each other. And I had a constituent tell me, we call up to the department and say, how can we comply with this? And don't worry about that, we're not following that anymore. But they're at risk, because that same group, someone else could come in next week and fine them because they're not following that rule. So we need to get rid of those rules. So what we did, and I think this is a really great approach, and I hope that it's modeled across the country, is that we created a sunsetting. Every rule will automatically sunset after 10 years. and we're going to start looking at the rules that are out there now. But every new rule, and every rule that's out there in 10 years, will automatically sunset unless proactive action is taken by the department. So if you are using that rule and it's important to the way that things function, then all you have to do is renew. But if you don't, it goes off the books. And this was found to be the single most positive regulatory reform for business by the Merck and some group that studied it. I mean, because it's so many regulations, it's hard to go after them individually. And we do go after them individually. We have these big bills that that are not popular because it's usually 60 or 70 pages, and internally they call them the Christmas tree bill because they're unrelated little ornaments, but they all are regulatory reform. And that's when you come to me and say, this is a problem in my industry or my business, and it's wrong and it shouldn't be that way, and we look into it and we do the research and we find out you're right, let's change it. We don't know those things unless people on the ground tell us. And so there are little tweaks here and there, not a big rewrite relating to one area like the Farm Bill, but a lot of little things. And we put them all together and we call them the Regulatory Reform Act. And we've done a lot of that as well. And if you have those issues, you can bring them forward before the 10 years and we'll try to address them. So regulatory reform is a big issue. The other two big things that I ran on are education and healthcare. And I think those are my priorities for two reasons. One is it's people, it's real life, it really impacts people, and that's also where I live. I mean, I have kids in school and I see things I've been a volunteer in the public school and in the classroom and teachers, so it affects everyone, and my husband's a physician, so he's touching people in the office and in the operating room. So those things are really important, and I live, kind of with that on-the-ground mentality, which going to Raleigh and being involved in policy at a different level with the amount of time it takes to make things happen, and the vagueness sometimes that we're dealing with, where there's 1,000 people in a department who take the idea and then translate it down to how we take action, that has really been a stretch for me because I'm like the PTO mom, like we're going to have a plan and you're going to do this and you're going to do that and here's the time frame and we know how it's going to happen, and this environment is nothing like that because all the legislators, we can do whatever we want. And I can file any bill that I want and there is no one to stop me. All they can do is put it in rules if they don't like it and not hear it. But I can decide, I hate cats, let's make cats illegal. And I could draft that and file it. So I want to tell you that if you see something ridiculous, people file ridiculous things, and sometimes just to make a statement or to keep a promise that are never going to go anywhere. So if you see that, call us and say, people who are familiar with this, is there energy behind that concept, or is that just someone putting something out there? So there's a lot of maneuvering I've learned about, so I can give you a whole talk about what really happens to some of those bills. But you can file anything, so it's like a living, breathing kind of environment out there in the legislature. So education is a big important issue. The biggest thing we did in this short session was teacher pay. We finally were able to grow our economy enough to where we weren't in a deficit to address some of our teacher pay issue. We are really far behind, and we got really far behind under Democrat rule, and they try to give us all the blame, but we didn't get here overnight into being so low in our teacher pay. We, I think, have a whole cultural issue there. But we are focused on that, and the average was 7%, but higher amounts for our lower teachers who've been stuck at the same place without any steps for their whole career, where they came in promising steps, and they were stuck there. And other folks were stuck at a higher level, so it wasn't quite as painful for them. So we're going to address that, and now we will have one of the highest starting teacher salaries in our region. There's more to do there. There's more in the next session. I really want to focus on differentiated pay, which would be more about contribution, not based on testing of your students, which you really don't control, but you know who's contributing. Someone there knows who's contributing, and you can contribute in a lot of different ways, and we do that in some ways, like if you're coaching, but if you're mentoring or you're being a teacher leader, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can contribute. So we're working with the school systems on how do we capture that. And we say, it's not necessarily that you get a master's, but maybe you get a master's in the topic that you teach. We'd like to be able to extend that supplement. We had some issues with that. And have it to be a lot of different ways where we can really reward our best teachers who are contributing the most, because our outcomes have got to improve. We have worked on local control and flexibility. A lot of the money that comes down used to be put into these silos without the flexibility locally to move them around based on your needs. Well, now we give full control locally. We give them money that's based on a formula like number of students. So we have a formula that says, well, that means this many teachers' assistants, this much money in textbooks is one way to do it. And that's how much money you get. But once you get the money, you can spend it differently depending on what you need to do locally, except for one area. And I think this is really telling. The only area where we don't allow you to move any money into is central office. Central office. So you cannot spend any more of the money in administration. So the idea is that more of the money is in the classroom, not in the back-end system. And the fact that that's the one area where we had to put a control tells you that we had a problem with that. And the rest of it is, you know, in your environment, your teachers, you might want one teacher and 3 teacher assistants and a big classroom and technology. And we don't limit the class size, but we do have a guideline. But what works in one school is not always going to work in another. And with technology, there's a lot of different approaches, and we want to support innovation and we want to support outcomes, what's working for the kids. So there's a lot of different ways. We did expand charter schools so that there's a lot more options, and we are seeing tremendous growth in charter schools, and that's creating competition among the schools. And there's some issues about the funding. I met with our local superintendent this week. He's losing money because we have this new charter in town, and it's a different amount than he was expecting, and so it's a little bit tricky, but I think overall it's better for our kids, and that's the most important thing. And I supported some legislation that allowed more flexibility for homeschool. And we also had the opportunity scholarships, which are those vouchers for low-income kids to be able to go to a private school if they want to. And that is currently in the court system, but I believe that it is going to come out successfully. And I have a constituent here in Wilson who's like, you know, my kid is, they're at Greenfield and they started and now it's in the courts and we don't have the money. What should I do? And I said, you know, stay the course. I mean, we think that in the next few months we'll have that resolved because it just makes sense and people are getting good results. And they'll tell you, but they don't have the same controls that we have. But who's making the decision? It's the most local decision of all. It's the parent. If the parent thinks this is the best thing for that kid for that year, then that's what matters, because it's not about the numbers. And sometimes there's so many things that play into what's going to be the best choice for your child. And we want them to get a good education, but this is so personal. And I think giving the parents a choice is going to have that side benefit of that the parents will choose the public school. Most of them are going to choose the public school because it's just that much more convenient. And then they'll be more invested in it because they had a choice, even if they didn't choose it. You know, so I think there's a lot going on there by giving choice. So education is one of our top priorities. We have the #1 funded university system in the country, and we've maintained that even in these tight budget times because that's a huge advantage for North Carolina. So we don't want to lose that. We recognize that, and we are asking the universities to make some cuts and to be more efficient and to make sure that we don't raise our tuition, but we're still the #1 funded university system. We have one of the best community college systems in the country. We have a lot to be proud of there. And we've continued to fund that and continue to work on that because that is critical for workforce development and jobs. And it really is that intersection between jobs in the economy and education happens at the community college. So we're fortunate we have one here. We have support in most counties. And the early college program that we have is really incredible too. And we're one of the most advanced in the country in that area, which is where there's an option to go to high school at the community college and graduate with a degree, a 2-year community college degree in 5 years. So we pay for them to go to, they take high school classes at the college campus, they take college classes. They kind of miss out on some of the social things, thank God, because it's really bad in high school right now. But they can make that choice. So you get kids, and it's targeted at people who are first generation college. It's not a requirement, but that's really who they're going after. If kids who were kind of marginal, maybe not going to be successful in the traditional school, and they are outperforming our highest academic kids in the traditional schools. It's working. It's a little bit more expensive, and we don't have it for everyone, and we don't have the community college capacity, but we're working on expanding that, and that's something that we're also working on expanding here in Wilson, which will be exciting. Okay, healthcare. So we're also mean and rotten because we didn't take the money for the Medicaid expansion. And here's why. Because the Medicaid is growing and growing and growing in our budget. We just passed our budget for this year, or for the next year, and it's a $21 billion state budget. And like about 56% is education. growing number, like over 30, is Medicaid. And it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We had to do $500 million last in the short session that was not in the budget, that we overran the numbers for Medicaid because it's an entitlement, and so if you use it, we have to pay that bill, and it's really hard to estimate. And more people, when the economy was like it was, were getting on Medicaid, and they were hearing about it, so we had the woodwork effect of people coming out and getting on Medicaid. And it's just unsustainable, and it's not efficient, and the internal workings of the department are poor right now. So the strategy that we've taken is to try to reform our current Medicaid system before we would even consider this idea of expansion. But also the whole idea of expansion of having providers paid at 70% of cost is not sustainable long term because everyone's getting squeezed, and we just think we need to change from Obamacare, and we don't want to support that going forward, and we want to be able to have a new solution, but at the same time we don't want to deny care to our citizens. I mean, we want to have a healthier North Carolina. That's certainly a priority. So working on solutions of how do we address Medicaid. We've had different proposals out there right now from the administration's done a lot of work and a lot of listening groups and things to come up with a proposal, and there's a proposal in the House, there's a proposal in the Senate. Initially we were going to have a special session in November after the election to address it. I think now we're going to come back in January. But I have to go to Raleigh next week. We're meeting and we're trying to hammer out how we're going to address Medicaid, because that's a huge problem for us. If we can't get that spending under control and have a manageable system, then it's going to continue to keep the resources from other areas of priority that we need, like education, infrastructure, and just everything else gets squeezed out because it's taking up more and more of the pie. So the systems that we're looking at are removing some of the risk from just that the state government pays. And it's a combination of state and federal government, but moving the risk to some of the providers or some managed care or some other groups who would take on a group of patients, and they for a set amount of money, and they own the risk, and they would be incented to keep them healthier. We don't want to make sure they're not incented to deny care and just make it cheaper. So that's the rub, is finding the right group of providers and the right accountable care organizations that patients can work with, that will make them healthier and positive, but we would be able to have budget certainty by saying we're going to pay you X amount of money and you're going to take care of these patients, and you might lose money, but the state can control its budget. So that is very important. Also, when I was in the reception at the very first week of work, and I'm sure you guys know Buck Newton, who's our senator, or have heard of him, and he's a good friend of mine, and he told me before I went up there, he's like, listen, your job is to know these people, because you're going to need to work with them, and if they don't know you, and you don't have a relationship, it's going to be hard for you to get anything done for your constituents. So they have all these receptions every night after work at the beginning of session, and I know you, and you're going to want to get in your car and go home and see your kids, but you can't do that because this is your job. This is not just the fun after the job. Knowing those people and building relationships is part of your job, and even if you go and meet 5 different people or just talk to a few people, you have got to have in your mind that this is not the fun part I can skip, that it's really important. And that was really good advice, because you don't get to work with everyone, you don't get to work with the Senate members, and so you need to show up there and know those people, so that when the time comes, they'll talk to you, and then you can go and say, here's what I want to do. And it's important to be likable. You know, someone came up and they said, she's likable. You know what, you get invited to the table and people will talk to you. And that is how you get things done. So I went to these receptions, and I got myself all off topic. Why was I talking? Oh, well, at one of these receptions, a senior guy said to me, well, what are you going to specialize in? What are you going to do? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, you know, it's kind of like we're building a wall, and we all have our place to stand. And you pick one area, and you become the go-to person for that area. And then everyone does their part. And I was like, oh, well, I ran on a lot of different things, and I meant it. You know, I care about all these different things. And I said, nothing personal, but I don't know you, and I don't know him. I didn't know anyone up there. I said, so I guess I'm going to just walk along the wall and see the work that's happening and where it might be needed. And not only that, I'm a mom, and I don't do the most fun thing for me. I do whatever it takes to make my people successful. You know, I clean the toilet and do the laundry. You know, that's what I do. And so if everyone wants to stand in one part of the wall, but it's going to be more helpful to stand over here, then that might be the place. So I had that. It was a really good analogy for me because I love the Bible and I got that. And so I recognized walking along the wall and caring deeply about where we are in the economy, but lots of people wanted to stand there. So I served on those committees, but I didn't have to bring ideas up because there was a lot already happening. And some of the big things I ran on, I was like, where's voter ID? Oh, don't worry, our chairs are working on this. And that was also frustrating because you didn't always know. And it was like, well, we're doing it, but you couldn't see it when we get to deadlines. I was like, where is it? Where is it? Because I really meant it. So I want to know, what can I do to help move those things forward? So I walked along the wall and I saw where everything was. And I got all kind of great committee assignments. So I was really involved and very, very busy. And you know where I had to stand? Mental health. No one was standing in mental health. And gosh, it's such a big issue here. I mean, it's not the most exciting issue. There's no money in it. But it's such a great need, and our system is totally broken. And that's where I got to be most involved in some policy things in the last session, where we implemented statewide telepsychiatry. And I hope that you all don't have experience with this, but we have had really long waits in our emergency rooms with people coming in for mental illness. We don't have a place for them to go. There's no place. I mean, if you don't have a private connection, we don't have clinics anymore because it's frowned upon to separate them. And we've just taken some of the federal laws and ruined that system. And it's really, really sad. And some of the regulations that we have to deal with at the federal level are ridiculous. You're shocked, right? Anyway, the people were coming into the emergency room, and then we don't have providers who are skilled to take care of them. And oftentimes the sheriff is accompanying them because they're either being involuntarily committed or they're dangerous. And so we're taking resources from our sheriff's departments and costing money.
All over the state.
All over the state, and they're staying sometimes weeks in the emergency department because there's no place to send them. So they're not getting the care they need, and they're in crisis. And we're just, warehousing them until we can come up with a hospital bed where we were trying to close the hospitals and move into the communities. But we closed a hospital, but we didn't get services in the communities. So we really have a gap there. And they're like, well, maybe we should have another hospital. So it's a big mess. But anyway, the telepsychiatry project was